My name is Diana J. Lawson, and I am 32 years old. About a month ago, my mother-in-law moved in with us, and it was my husband's idea. He framed it like a temporary solution, said she was going through a rough patch, money issues, family drama, things he didn't really want to get into. I didn't press him. I probably should have, but I didn't. I didn't want to be the wife who said no to helping his mom. I told myself it wouldn't be forever, that we could handle a little inconvenience if it meant doing the right thing. At first, it really was fine. She mostly stayed in the guest room, watched TV downstairs, kept to herself. I went to work, ran errands, cooked dinner, lived my routine. Nothing felt off enough to worry about. But then there was this feeling, subtle at first, the kind you almost talk yourself out of. The sense that something wasn't where you left it, that the house remembered things differently than you did. The first time I noticed, it was my jewelry box. I came home from work, went into the bedroom to change, and saw it sitting slightly to the left of where I always kept it. Not dramatically moved, just enough that my brain paused. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at it like it might explain itself. I asked my husband if he'd touched it. He looked genuinely confused and said no. And honestly, that tracked. He barely noticed my jewelry, let alone rearranged it. I told myself I must have moved it and forgotten, but then it happened again. My clothes were folded differently in my drawers. Not wrong, just not how I do it. My perfumes weren't lined up the way I left them. A chair in the bedroom felt nudged, angled slightly differently. None of it was enough to accuse anyone of anything, but all of it together made my skin prickle. It felt like the room had been entered without my permission. I started paying closer attention, and that's when it got harder to ignore. One evening, I came home and noticed the bedroom closet door cracked open. I am meticulous about doors. I don't know why, I just am. I always close them, always. I opened the closet and saw my clothes pushed aside like someone had been flipping through them. I stood there with my hands on the hangers, my chest tight, feeling stupid for being angry and terrified at the same time. It wasn't that anything was missing. Nothing had been stolen. That somehow made it worse. Someone was touching my things for no reason other than curiosity. My private space, the one place in the house that was supposed to be mine, didn't feel private anymore. I tried to reason it out. Maybe she was looking for something. Maybe she needed a blanket or thought she'd left something in there. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to be dramatic. So I went to my husband and told him what I'd been noticing, carefully, calmly. The moved jewelry box, the closet, the drawers. His response was immediate and absolute. My mom would never do that. Not, that's strange. Not, let me talk to her. Just flat denial. He said it like I'd accused her of something outrageous. I tried to explain I wasn't saying she had bad intentions, just that it made me uncomfortable. He shut me down. She's not like that, he said again, like repeating it made it true. I walked away from that conversation feeling smaller than when I'd started, like I'd done something wrong by even bringing it up. For a day or two, I told myself to let it go. Maybe I was stressed. Maybe I was imagining patterns that weren't there. But the feeling didn't leave. It settled in. Every time I went into the bedroom, I felt like I was checking for evidence instead of relaxing. I started second-guessing my own memory. Did I leave that there, or did someone else move it? That kind of doubt does something to you. It makes you feel unsteady in your own mind. By the end of that week, I realized something that scared me more than the snooping itself. My husband wasn't on my side, not even a little. And if he wouldn't even consider the possibility that his mom crossed a boundary, then I was on my own and figuring out how to protect myself. That was the moment the house stopped feeling like home. After that conversation, I tried to convince myself I could live with it. I told myself it was temporary, that once his mom got back on her feet, she'd move out and this weird tension would disappear with her. But the problem wasn't just her anymore. It was the fact that I felt alone in my own house, like I was the only one taking this seriously. The snooping didn't stop. It escalated. One morning, I opened my dresser and found my underwear drawer rearranged. Not messy, not chaotic, just reorganized in a way that definitely wasn't mine. I stood there holding a pair of socks like they were evidence in a crime scene, my heart pounding for no logical reason. I hadn't touched that drawer in days. There was no excuse left that made sense. I tried to keep my voice calm when I brought it up to my husband again. I told him I wasn't accusing. I just needed him to listen. I needed him to acknowledge that something was happening. He sighed like I was exhausting him. He said I was overthinking. He said his mom was probably just cleaning or tidying, and that I needed to stop assuming the worst. That word, assuming, hit harder than I expected. Because I wasn't assuming, I was noticing. And he was telling me my own observations couldn't be trusted. I asked him to at least talk to her, just casually, to see if she'd admit to being in our room. He refused, flat out. He said he wasn't going to accuse his mom of something so ridiculous when she was already stressed. He told me to let it go. Let it go. Like this wasn't our bedroom. Like I wasn't feeling violated. Like my comfort didn't matter. After that, I stopped bringing it up for a few days. Not because it stopped bothering me, but because I could feel how quickly the conversation turned against me. Every time I tried to explain, I ended up defending myself instead of addressing the issue. I started questioning whether I was being dramatic, whether this was some weird territorial instinct I needed to get over. Then I came home one afternoon and found the closet door open again. Not cracked this time, open. My clothes were pushed aside, hangers clumped together like someone had been flipping through them in a hurry. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the empty space between dresses, my stomach twisting. There was no innocent explanation left. I felt angry, but underneath that was something worse. Fear. Not the kind where you think someone is going to hurt you physically, but the kind where you realize someone has access to you in ways you didn't consent to, and no one is stopping them. I considered confronting my mother-in-law directly. I even rehearsed what I would say in my head. Calm, polite, non-accusatory. But every version ended the same way. Her denying it, my husband taking her side, me being labeled the problem. That's when I realized something else. If I confronted her without proof, I'd lose. I'd be the paranoid daughter-in-law attacking a woman who was just trying to help. And once that label stuck, everything I said after would be filtered through it. I started feeling like I was losing control of the narrative of my own life. Like I could sense the truth, but I couldn't make anyone else see it. My instincts were screaming at me, and everyone around me was telling me to quiet them down. That's when the idea first crossed my mind. Not as a plan yet, more like a desperate thought. If I couldn't be believed, I'd have to prove it. Not with arguments, not with feelings, with something undeniable. I didn't know how yet. I just knew I couldn't keep living like this, doubting myself in my own home, while the people who were supposed to protect me pretended nothing was wrong. And once that realization settled in, I couldn't unfeel it. I didn't decide to set the trap in a burst of anger. It came from exhaustion, from weeks of being told I was imagining things, from the quiet dread of walking into my bedroom and wondering what would feel off next. I needed something that would remove all doubt, something that didn't rely on anyone believing my feelings. I needed proof. The idea made me feel uneasy the moment it formed. It felt manipulative, dramatic, even cruel. But every other option had already failed. Talking hadn't worked. Asking for support hadn't worked. Staying quiet only made it worse. So I ordered a fake positive pregnancy test online, the kind made for pranks, the kind that looks real enough to fool anyone who wasn't expecting to see it. When it arrived, it came in a plain envelope, completely unremarkable. I remember holding it in my hand and feeling my stomach twist. 2 pink lines. Convincing. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at it, wondering if this was crossing some invisible line. I hated that it had come to this, that I felt forced to trick someone just to protect my own privacy. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't even consider it. I couldn't trust him not to dismiss it or warn her. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. So I waited until I was alone, walked into the bedroom, and dropped the test into the trash can near the closet. Not buried, not hidden, just there. Then I went about my day like nothing was different. The next morning, everything felt heavier. I acted normal on purpose, chatting with my husband, saying goodbye to his mom, grabbing my keys. I didn't look at the trash. I didn't linger. I needed this to play out naturally. If she really was snooping, she'd find it. And if she wasn't, then I'd have my answer and a lot of guilt to deal with. I didn't expect it to explode the way it did. About 2 hours into my shift at work, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, texts, one after another. At first, I panicked, thinking something terrible had happened. Then I read the messages. "Congratulations, we're so happy for you. When's the due date? We can't wait to meet the baby." My hands went cold. It took maybe 5 seconds for everything to click. She'd found it. She'd gone through our trash. And instead of coming to me or even her son, she'd told the entire family. Before I could even process that, my husband showed up at my workplace. He looked frantic, eyes wide, pacing like he'd lost something. He pulled me aside and asked why I hadn't told him I was pregnant, how far along I was, why he had to hear it from his mom. I stared at him, completely stunned. He said his mom found the test in the trash. Said it like that part was normal, casual. My shock must have shown because he kept talking, trying to catch up to his own confusion. That's when I asked him, very calmly, how his mom ended up finding a pregnancy test in our bedroom trash. He froze, just for a second. Then he waved it off and said that wasn't the point. The point was that I didn't tell him. Something snapped inside me. I told him the test wasn't real. I told him exactly why I put it there. And instead of being angry at his mom for invading our privacy, he got angry at me. He accused me of lying, of manipulating the situation, of being cruel to his mother. He demanded I take a real pregnancy test immediately, right there. I agreed, humiliated and shaking, just to end the argument. It came back negative, obviously, and he acted like that was the real betrayal. When I got home that evening, my head was pounding. His mom was cheerful, almost smug, acting like nothing had happened. When I tried to bring up the snooping, she brushed it off and said everyone makes mistakes. The trap had worked. The truth was out. And somehow, I was still the villain. By the time I got home that night, the air in the house felt thick, like something had burned and the smoke hadn't cleared. My husband was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, not looking up when I walked in, his silence louder than any argument we'd had so far. I went straight to the kitchen, needing space, needing something normal, but of course that didn't last. "Do you realize how upset my mom is?" he said without looking at me. Not "I'm upset," not "we need to talk," just her. I turned and asked him, what about me? What about the weeks I'd spent feeling watched and dismissed? He finally put his phone down and looked at me, and the expression on his face was cold in a way that made my chest ache. He said, "I lied." He said I set her up for no reason. No reason. I reminded him that she'd been in our bedroom, our private space, going through our things. He sighed like I was exhausting him and said she was going through a tough time, that maybe she was just looking for something, that I didn't know what was going on in her head. I told him that was exactly the problem, that I didn't know what was going on in her head and that it scared me. He didn't have an answer. He just muttered that I'd handled everything wrong. The next morning, my phone lit up with messages from his family, one after another. His aunt saying how cruel I was to get his mother's hopes up. A cousin telling me I should have just talked to her instead of playing games. His sister calling me toxic and saying her brother deserved better. Not one message asked if I was okay. Not one mentioned the snooping. I showed them to my husband, hoping something would finally click. He shrugged and asked what I expected. That question broke something in me. I told him I expected him to care that his mom went through our trash, through our bedroom, and announced something that wasn't hers to share. He said she didn't mean any harm and that what I did was extreme. I felt like I was talking to a wall, one that had already decided I was the problem. Later that day, his mom cornered me in the kitchen while I was doing dishes. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching me like she was waiting for an apology. When she finally spoke, she said she forgave me for the pregnancy test. The audacity of it made my hands shake. I asked her what exactly she thought she was forgiving me for, and she said I probably wasn't thinking straight. I asked her when she planned to apologize for going through our bedroom and telling the whole family. Her face hardened. She said she wasn't snooping, she was tidying, and if I didn't want her to see things, I shouldn't leave them where she could find them. She wasn't even denying it anymore, she was justifying it. She told me I needed to grow up, that it wasn't just my house, it was her son's too, and she was his mother. I walked out of the kitchen before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how small the house felt, how little space I actually had. My bedroom didn't feel like mine anymore. My marriage didn't feel safe. And the worst part was realizing that the people who were supposed to be on my side had already chosen theirs. I didn't sleep much. I just lay there, listening to the sounds of the house, wondering how everything had flipped so quickly, and knowing deep down that this wasn't something that could be smoothed over with a conversation or an apology that would never come. I thought I'd hit my limit already, but I was wrong. There's always a deeper layer when someone feels entitled to you, and I found it the next morning in the most chilling way possible. I came home from work and found my mother-in-law sitting at the dining table with my husband. They stopped talking the second I walked in. That alone set off alarms. She smiled at me, small and knowing, like she'd just won something. My husband said they were just talking. His voice was too quick, too rehearsed. I went upstairs to the bedroom to change, and that's when my stomach dropped. My bedside drawer was slightly open. I know that drawer. I close it every single time. I opened it and went through my things faster and faster until my hand landed on my birth control packet. It was there, but something felt wrong. I counted the pills, counted again. One was missing. My hands started shaking. I stood there trying to convince myself there was another explanation, but there wasn't. I stormed downstairs, holding the packet like evidence. I asked her if she'd been in my room again. She raised an eyebrow and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I told her not to play dumb. I told her a pill was missing. She said maybe I misplaced it. I asked her how someone misplaces a single birth control pill. She said she didn't need to explain anything to me. My husband stepped in, asking what was going on, trying to calm everyone down. I told him his mom had been in my room again, and now one of my pills was gone. She sighed dramatically and said I was always accusing her of things she didn't do. He looked at me and said he didn't think she would do that. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. That word again, misunderstanding. Something inside me cracked. I told him I wasn't making this up. I told him she'd been snooping since the day she moved in, and now she'd crossed a line that terrified me. He told me I was overreacting. I locked the bedroom door that night. He complained, said it was unnecessary. I didn't care. It was the first thing I'd done in weeks that made me feel even slightly in control. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, holding that packet in my hand, realizing this wasn't just about privacy anymore. This was about trust, about safety, about whether I could live with someone who didn't believe me when it mattered. The next morning, I overheard her on the phone in the living room. She said I was sensitive, insecure, that she didn't know how her son put up with me, that she was just trying to help and I was acting like she was a criminal. I walked in and asked if she had something she wanted to say to me directly. She rolled her eyes and said I was overreacting again. My husband walked in mid-argument and asked us to calm down. Calm down. I asked him how I was supposed to be calm when his mom was messing with my birth control and trash-talking me to his family. He rubbed his temples like I was the problem. That was the moment I knew. Not suspected, knew. I wasn't safe in that house, emotionally, and maybe not physically either. The next day, while they were both out, I packed a bag. Just essentials, clothes, toiletries, things I couldn't bear to leave behind. I wrote a note and left it on the counter. I told him I couldn't do this anymore, that I needed space, that unless he was ready to acknowledge what had happened, I wasn't coming back. Walking out felt terrifying and relieving at the same time, like stepping off a ledge and realizing you should have jumped sooner. I stayed with a friend that night, the kind of friend who didn't ask too many questions and didn't tell me what I should do. She handed me a blanket, cleared space on the couch, and let me talk until my voice went hoarse. I didn't realize how tightly wound I'd been until I sat in a quiet living room where no one was watching me, no one was touching my things, no one was telling me I was imagining my own reality. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up in a panic. The next morning, my husband texted. The message wasn't an apology, it was confusion mixed with irritation. He asked where I was and said I'd overreacted. He said we needed to fix this. Fix this, like it was a broken appliance and not a marriage hanging on trust that had already snapped. I told him I needed space and that I wasn't coming back until he was ready to have an honest conversation about his mom's behavior and his role in enabling it. He didn't reply for hours. When he did, it was another deflection. He said his mom was devastated, that she hadn't slept, that she'd been crying all day. He said she didn't mean any harm and that I was punishing everyone for a misunderstanding. I stared at my phone, feeling the old pull to comfort, to smooth things over, to be reasonable. Then I remembered the missing pill, the rearranged drawers, the way he looked at me when I begged him to believe me. I told him her feelings were not my responsibility, and that until he could acknowledge what actually happened, there was nothing to discuss. A day later, the tone shifted. He said maybe counseling would help, that maybe a neutral third party could help us communicate better. I agreed, but with conditions. Therapy, not mediation. Boundaries on paper. His mom not living with us. No contact with her until trust was rebuilt. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know about how hard this would be. In the days that followed, the noise from his family died down. Fewer texts, fewer accusations. Silence settled in, and instead of feeling abandoned, I felt lighter. I started to notice how my shoulders weren't constantly tense, how my thoughts weren't racing every time I reached into a drawer. Being away from that house showed me just how much anxiety I'd been carrying without realizing it. I don't know yet if this marriage will survive. I don't know if my husband is capable of choosing me when it matters, not just when it's convenient. What I do know is that I'm done minimizing myself to keep the peace. I'm done questioning my instincts because someone else is uncomfortable with them. If I go back, it will be on my terms, with real boundaries and real consequences. And if I don't, then I'll build a life where my space is respected and my voice isn't treated like a nuisance. For the first time since his mom moved in, I feel like myself again. Not the villain, not the hysterical wife, just a woman who finally chose to believe her own reality.